You think Stalingrad was won with bullets? Wrong! I'm going to show you how one of the biggest armies ever was completely destroyed because of one tiny mistake on a piece of paper. This isn't a story about fighting. It's about how forgetting one simple thing led to the most insane military disaster in history. Section 1. The Grand Ambition. It's 1942, and the Germans are on an insane winning streak. So Hitler comes up with this crazy plan called Case Blue to grab all the Soviet oil and win the war in one shot. He split his army in two. One group went for the oil, and the other, the massive 6th Army under General Paulus, got what seemed like an easy side quest. Take a city named after Stalin. This city, Stalingrad, was a huge deal. It controlled a massive river the Soviets needed. Capturing it was supposed to protect the main German army. On paper, the plan looked unstoppable, just like the Blitzkrieg strategy that had worked so well before. The German high command was insanely arrogant after destroying the Soviets in 1941. But this whole plan was a house of cards. It had a massive flaw, not in its battle plan, but in its simple math. The planners in Berlin were so confident that they made one of the biggest miscalculations in history. They completely forgot how much stuff it takes to keep an army alive. This one tiny oversight would literally doom hundreds of thousands of men. Section 2. The First Crack. Okay, let's talk about something no one thinks about. Logistics. It's basically moving food and bullets. And for the Germans, this was their biggest challenge. The Soviet Union is huge. And get this, most of the German army was still using horses. They were trying to conquer a modern country with an old-school army. Their entire supply chain depended on trains, but the Soviet tracks were a different size. They had to rebuild every single mile of track as they went. It was slow, and it was always getting attacked. This created a massive bottleneck, choking the flow of supplies. As the 6th Army pushed to Stalingrad, their supply lines stretched over 900 miles long. The further they went, the weaker it got. An army this big needs at least 500 tons of supplies every single day. That's a crazy amount of food, fuel for thousands of vehicles, and ammo for over 1,800 cannons. The German supply system was already pushed to its absolute limit. Before the first shot was even fired in the city, the 6th Army was already in a ton of trouble. The trap was already set. Section 3. The Noose tightens. The 6th Army starts this insane, brutal fight for Stalingrad, turning the city into a total nightmare of fire and rubble. Hitler is obsessed with taking this city for propaganda points, and he keeps pouring more guys into the fight, completely ignoring how exposed they were. See, the German flanks, stretching for hundreds of miles, weren't protected by their best soldiers. They were held by their Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allies who had way worse gear. The Soviet commander, General Zhukov, saw this weakness and came up with a genius plan. On November 19th, they launched Operation Uranus. Bam! 2 massive Soviet armies smashed right through the weak flanks. In just 4 days, they completely surrounded the German 6th Army. In an instant, their supply problem became an insane crisis. An entire army of over 250,000 soldiers was trapped. The smart move was to break out immediately, but Hitler said no. He ordered them to stay put and declared them Fortress Stalingrad. He made a promise. The army would be supplied entirely from the air. The head of the Air Force, Hermann Göring, told Hitler they could do it. But this was a huge lie. His own experts said it was impossible to fly in the 500 tons of supplies they needed every day. But Göring made the promise anyway. The airlift was a disaster from the start. On their best day, they only managed to fly in about 100 tons, less than a quarter of what the army needed just to stay alive. That promise wasn't just a mistake, it was a death sentence. Section 4. The Collapse. Inside the encirclement, which the soldiers called the Cauldron, things got unimaginably bad. The fight wasn't just against the Soviets anymore. It was against starving and freezing to death. Rations were cut over and over. A German soldier wrote in his diary, "Food is becoming dire." One loaf of bread for 7 people. They were eating horses just to survive. Frostbite was everywhere. These soldiers, a lot of them still in summer clothes, were not ready for the insane Russian winter. Temperatures dropped to 20 degrees Celsius, and their clothes would literally freeze to their bodies. Men froze to death in basements. They ran out of ammo. They ran out of fuel. Their powerful tanks became useless steel boxes. They had no medical supplies. The wounded were just left to die. Morale completely disappeared. The soldiers knew they'd been sacrificed. One wrote home, "Stalingrad, the graveyard of the German soldiers." Another wrote in his last letter, "We don't know if we'll get home. Better a bullet in the head from myself than anything else." By late January 1943, it was over. On January 31st, General Paulus, who Hitler had just promoted to Field Marshal, basically telling him to kill himself instead of surrendering, capitulated. 2 days later, the last soldiers gave up. CTA and conclusion. The Battle of Stalingrad wasn't just a defeat, it was an absolute apocalypse for the Germans. It shattered the idea that their army was invincible and completely turned the tide of the war on the Eastern Front. Check out these insane numbers. Of the 250,000 men trapped in the cauldron, around 91,000 surrendered. And of those, only about 5,000 ever made it home. The whole Stalingrad campaign cost the Axis powers almost 800,000 casualties. This is the ultimate lesson. You can have the bravest soldiers and the best tactics, but if you can't get them food and bullets, you lose. The fate of the Sixth Army wasn't decided by a heroic battle. It was decided by spreadsheets and train schedules. They made a simple, crazy mistake. They thought their ambition was more important than basic math. And it proved, in the most horrible way possible, that in war, logistics is literally everything. Stalingrad's story is a crazy reminder that some of history's biggest moments come down to the tiniest details. If you want to see more insane stories like this, hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments what piece of history we should break down next. Thanks for watching.